The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Good evening and welcome to my State of Mind. I am Dan Yorke. Progressive politics in the country are moving at a rapid clip, and so too they are in Rhode Island. A veteran, previously elected and successful in his primary, State Senator Sam Bell, is a leading voice in this movement, so to speak, and has a lot of things to say about Washington right on down to Smith Hill and the connection between the two. With no further ado, let us meet him and begin our conversation. State Senator Sam Bell joins us, victorious in his primary and without a Republican challenger on the ballot at least. Clear sailing for another provocative term in the state Senate, no doubt. Sam, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So, because everyone's chatting about it, the take on the presidential debate early this week, not that that's our wheelhouse tonight, but thought maybe you'd want to share some thoughts.
Yeah, I'm supporting Joe Biden, obviously. I think Donald Trump has been a disgrace to our country and has truly degraded the quality of our political discourse. I think, unfortunately, a lot of Rhode Island conservative, machine conservative Democrats have really been emboldened by Donald Trump and have dragged the quality of Rhode Island's political discourse even further down. And it's been really unfortunate to watch the way our country's politics have been lowered to this level. And I think, one of the really important things that we have to take away from this is that these positions are incredibly powerful, and it really matters who's in positions of power. And that's why it's so important that here in Rhode Island, we need to move on from the legacy of really problematic leadership from hardcore ideological conservatives like Dominic Ruggerio, the president of the Senate, of course, famously said that he wasn't sure if it was even a good idea to impeach Donald Trump. And I think that when we talk about the lowering of ethical standards, when people see someone like the president of the United States lower ethical standards that much, and then start saying, well, maybe that's okay. Maybe we can let them get away with it. The message that it sends throughout Rhode Island politics is a deeply problematic message.
All right, well, that's fascinating. So let me ask you this. I'm not going to quarrel with your thought on Donald Trump. I come from at least the same wheelhouse. All right. So that's where it is. And his comportment in this debate, I think, reflected a lot of who he is and how he's run the White House in the past 4 years.
Unfortunately.
But tell me what the tangible example is of that kind of lowering the bar, lowering of presidentiality, lowering of government comportment, lowering of ethical standards. Can you give me a tangible example of how that's manifested itself here in Rhode Island?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my campaign saw a lot of it. One of the things that was used in my campaign, which I think is a really classic example of how the Rhode Island machine will run a campaign, was the campaign that the machine prioritized the most, poured the most money into, put the most emphasis on, was running my opponent's campaign. And some of the strategies that were employed very much were things that come straight out of the Trump playbook, such as the strategy of using completely false, anonymous social media accounts to spread completely made up things, which was used actually to considerable effect against Hillary Clinton. We had people spread these Russian bots saying that Hillary Clinton had run an orgy island and completely ridiculous and horrible stuff. And that had an impact on the presidential race. And one of the things that was used against me is that there was this anonymous Twitter account that would do things like Photoshop my endorsements. I remember people asked me, why did, Sunrise endorse your opponent? And I said, no, they didn't. But people actually believed some of that completely made up and false stuff. And then they also really dragged it into the gutter by pushing anti-Semitic attacks on me and that kind of stuff. And the idea of just using anonymous social media accounts to really just unleash and go as far into the gutter as possible is, I think, a really concrete example of a political tactic that the machine has picked up from Donald Trump. Another thing that I think that they've picked up on is the idea that you just go with it on the ethics problems. You know, Ruggerio is someone who I think it would have been harder to sell as Senate president and to sell continuing him as Senate president if it weren't for the Trump era. Because one of the real messages behind selling Dominic Ruggerio is you just ignore the ethics problems, you just power through it. And that kind of audacity is something that the Rhode Island machine didn't actually have. Like, there were people who stepped down from more mild scandals, who were really cautious about elevating people with problematic ethics records into positions of power. We've seen so much of that slip. We've even seen it slip with so many of our appointments. And, you know, we're willing to put people in positions of power with really problematic ethics records. And I think that has been unleashed in Rhode Island with the Trump presidency. It's so hard to get people to care about the kind of scandals that used to matter, small campaign finance issues, things like that. When the president is flouting the law so aggressively, it lowers the standards across the whole country, and it's really sad.
Yeah, well, listen, I hear you. Notwithstanding the Senate president's past challenges, you know, for the most part, at least to the naked eye, he has comported himself with I would suggest an establishment dignity. But I understand what we've talked about.
I so disagree with that. I think that, you know, you've seen legislative leaders like Mattiello, who I think have comported themselves poorly, but nothing on the level at which Ruggerio has run the Senate. It's been autocratic. I mean, Mattiello opened up the rules a little bit, allowed some process reforms. Ruggerio completely cracked down, went in the exact opposite direction. And the message I think they learned is that they were just going to use their full power and to autocratically ram things through and to not even listen, to not even care about many of these ethics and process concerns. The idea of dignity, of caring about these kinds of things is so gone from the Rhode Island Senate. And it's sad, because there's a real history of the Rhode Island Senate having some strong principles. I mean, there are some great principled senators. You know, J. Michael Lenahan is a really good example. You know, some people who really held the Senate and comported it with dignity. Teresa Piper Weed is another example of someone who I think was much more conservative than I am, but really believed in leading the Senate with dignity. And that's something that we've lost. And the fact that we've lost it is so damaging to our state, especially because the Senate is so powerful. And the Senate is the body that is the last forum to examine all the personnel positions, because the Senate is the forum that votes on people.
Yeah.
And so that becomes extremely problematic when we lose that level of dignity and professionalism and competence.
So I want to talk about some of the stuff that's going on right now with a lot of the financial decisions that are being made. I'll as often it happens with you and I'll leave that where it is and leave open the furthering discussion on some of the process, because I do think the process matters. What I'm saying is, to the naked eye, the Senate president has been, you know, scandal free, so to speak, versus where you look at the House Speaker, who is jammed up 8 ways to Sunday, getting himself in crosshairs on the convention center. I mean, next week he's going to have one of his independent contractors involved in a trial over the 2016 election. At least the Senate president is, for his current term of leadership, seems to be exempt from that. Here's the thing. The reason I'm sure that they were set up behind Joanne Ryan, the city councilor who gave you a run for your money, is that they don't like your politics, man. You're part of the progressive group that is gaining momentum. There's a conservative Democrat or establishment Democratic culture here that they are trying to hold on to and defend, and that tactics and social media shenanigans aside, and all of that, what you said, I'll take it for what it's worth because it's most likely true. They just don't like your politics. You are a thorn in their side, a voice, formerly in the wilderness, but it's becoming a lesser dense forest right now, right? But there's a change agency happening. They don't like it. That's kind of the way the battle is.
Oh, of course. But what I was saying is that I think a lot of the ethical standards that were shown in that campaign, I think Ruggerio's campaign saw similar problems. I mean, I don't think it was right for him to personally deny the automatic mailing of mail ballot applications just so that he could distribute all the mail ballot applications in his district with his campaign literature on it. I mean, like, some of the audacity that people have on decisions like that comes, I really believe it's unleashed by Donald Trump. And so many Rhode Island conservatives with these problematic ethics records look at Donald Trump and say, well, we can just do whatever we want and we can get away with it. So let's go ahead. And that's very much, I think, the mentality that Dominic Ruggerio has. And that's, I believe, why he made the statement that he wasn't sure that it was a good idea to impeach Donald Trump, because it's really core to him because of his incredibly problematic, long and consistent ethics record that we have to ignore these things. Because if we don't, then he needs to be removed from his position of power as Senate president.
All right. When we come back, we'll talk about the General Assembly in its current form, which is most likely found on a milk carton these days. We'll be right back with State Senator Sam Bell. Stay with us on My State of Mind, please. Back with State Senator Sam Bell, who has recently won his primary against City Councilor Joanne Ryan and is probably clear sailing into yet another term at the Senate. You start to turn the corner on quasi-veteranship, right, as an elected official, and your perspective becomes, well, it counts more. Equity matters in politics. Sam, you and I don't agree on a lot of political things, but I will tell you, process and government stuff, there seems to be, and I know it's been building, kind of a common ground space that Rhode Island General Assembly Republicans and progressives are finding, and that is how the government is running and what's fair about running the government. And with COVID and what it's done, you know, I have constantly said that I thought the emergency power given to the governor early on seemed appropriate to me, but it is way overdue for reform, way overdue for oversight. The General Assembly leadership is keeping the General Assembly somewhat dormant right now, so that a handful of people can make some decisions after November. What is your quick take on that? I find it to be disgraceful.
Well, this is one of the reasons why it's so important that we reject Dominic Ruggerio's divisive efforts to oppose the election of a consensus candidate for Senate president, someone who's an actual Democrat. Because the way Ruggerio is playing this is because his ideological position on the budget and on these kinds of issues is he's a supporter of brutal cuts. You know, he told me this is our opportunity to make cuts. And that is not a popular position because Rhode Islanders remember what happened in the last crisis when we slashed everything. You know, they laid off every single teacher in the city of Providence, the damage that was done to our schools, to our economy. We had the highest unemployment rate in the country. And people don't want to do that to the state again. And so the reason why they're doing it this way and it is twofold. One, they knew that they couldn't pass the budget they wanted to pass because there was too much opposition to the leadership of Dominic Ruggerio specifically to be able to pass a budget with a level of brutal cuts that he wanted. And so they couldn't pass that budget in June. And so they had to delay it. And now, and that also really speaks to the work of groups like Reclaim RI and all the activists who came out and really fought against a brutal budget. And so now, that we're looking at a position where they just got hammered in the elections. And Rhode Islanders stood up and said, We want an actual Democratic Party. We want people who will fight for those who are struggling and not just for the wealthy, the politically connected, the big corporations, big developers. And so now they're in a position where they want to do two things. One thing they want to do is they want to ram through the budget vote after the November election, so they no longer have any accountability, but before the new Senate gets seated, which is a much more pro-middle class, pro-working people kind of Senate, more Democratic Senate in January.
Let me jump in. The argument that has been made here in a group think between the governor, the Senate president, and the House Speaker is, hey, guess what? We're waiting on good or better news from Washington. We're waiting on better stimulus. We're ill-prepared based on what COVID has done to wreck the economy and the state government to make these decisions. My view has been we ought to have an A, B, C, D options budget right now to keep the place alive and try to figure this whole thing out. And by the way, why aren't we using COVID money to stimulate the small business economy here? And why aren't we putting it into the schools to make them safer in the way that the COVID money was designed? But their excuse is we don't have the data, so we can't make a decision.
But Dominic Ruggerio also did something to ram through brutal budget cuts that I think didn't really catch that much attention. So he's always been concerned with, and I think he shares a lot of the concerns people have with the incredibly problematic leadership of Brett Smiley, who, among other things, has, shown himself with some serious issues, management issues, when he was leading administration in Providence City Hall, and many people in the Senate were concerned about it. Well, so for a long time, he had been blocking.
Let me just say, people need to know Brett Smiley runs the administration now for Governor Raimondo. Go ahead.
Well, Raimondo had nominated Smiley for Department of Administration, and so many people in the Senate had serious concerns that for a long time, Ruggerio was not allowing the nomination because so many rank-and-file members of the Senate were very concerned about the nomination. However, Smiley is an extremist, ideologically right-wing person when it comes to brutal budget cuts. And so what Ruggerio did is he allowed Smiley to move through and get confirmed. And then, because Smiley in his position as Department of Administration oversees the budget office, we saw, and as soon as Smiley was actually confirmed by the Senate to that position, we saw a sharp turn to the right in how the governor is using the budget office. And that really comes through directly through Brett Smiley. So we saw the 15% order that all the departments have to now craft a budget with 15% across the board cuts that they would probably get cut further than. We're talking about mass unemployment. We're talking about incredible suffering if that actually goes through. Then they rammed through those layoffs at CCRI and RIC that were personally approved by Brett Smiley as director of the Department of Administration. So Ruggerio basically rammed through an appointment that people had serious ethics concerns about and personal behavior concerns about in order to put a very strong ideologically, fiscally right-wing person in this position of control over the budget. And because we're on a continued budget, essentially the Department of Administration, Brett Smiley, who ultimately reports to Governor Raimondo, is now personally running the budget. And so that was the decision of Dominic Ruggerio. That was a deliberate decision in order to ram through devastating budget cuts. Well, and I think we need to understand that detail.
I won't argue the spin, but I won't quarrel with the process. It's kind of how the sausage is made. And my problem is that right now, the entire constituency is in a fetal position over COVID, thinking that there's only one person running the show, and what they can do as leaders of both the House and the Senate goes pretty much uncontested by media and by most folks. And so I'll let your scenario sit there for people to digest. When we come back in our final segment, we'll have a few short minutes to ask Sam where he thinks this budget is going to go. And by the way, when there's no money, what do? Be right back with the State Senator. Stay with us. We'll have to revisit with State Senator Sam Bell for more extensive conversation here and on the radio, because this is a voice that is gaining momentum and needs to be heard. Some of you may not like it, but it's got to be heard. I only have a couple minutes. Senator, what do you do when you got no money, when the economy is teetering, when COVID is cost so much dough? What do you want to do to cure these budget deficits? What's your plan?
Well, it's actually pretty simple. It's not actually that difficult a budget to close if you're willing to take some real action. And I laid out a 19-point plan with 19 ideas for addressing the budget deficit. We don't have enough time to go through all of them, but I think the pay-go shift, the Medicaid shift, and repealing the tax cuts for the rich, legalizing marijuana, which of course is something that is personally being blocked by Dominic Ruggerio. Those things together can easily close this budget deficit. It's not that difficult to do, and there's no need to make any cuts to anything. And in fact, we should be making additional investments because we really have the budget space. It's a political decision to not take the really easy options to close the budget deficit and instead make brutal cuts. They're really trying to use this as an excuse to make brutal cuts, but there are really easy options on the table for avoiding it. The pay-go shift, the Medicaid shift, repealing the tax cuts for the rich. I also have laid down a long list of detailed and specific spending cuts that we can make on the capital side of the budget to adjust for the pay-go shift, which I think is a core component of this. And obviously the legalization of recreational marijuana. There are more specific things. I have proposed a debt restructuring that I think will save us a lot in both current budget year and net present value terms. But I don't think we have time to get into all the specifics, but it's really not that difficult.
But as we get closer, we'll bring you back for more clinical discussion of this budget. I appreciate your perspective. It is always a compelling one. And thank you, State Senator Sam Bell. Final word when we come back on My State of Mind Students. Ironically, those who may disagree on philosophy and how to spend our money will agree that the way our state government is running right now is awful, not constructive, and not serving the people's needs. Marriages sometimes can be peculiar in politics. You have a great night. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time on My State of Mind.